On a train, in a bus, in a car, on the way to your job. All alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere, you can listen everywhere, to the Philip Maloney podcast.
Hi, welcome back to the latest instalment of the Philip Maloney podcast. I am overwhelmed to be here with a gentleman who I've met recently. He's been in and around the scene, as it were, for us podcasters, people who like to keep an eye on the family courts and parental alienation, the CMS, etc. So I'm joined by a gentleman who's done quite a lot of work around the Ministry of Justice and their reporting. He's got a few questions to ask them. So I'm going to bring him in now. His name's Terry White, and he comes to us from what looks like a prison cell, but I'm told it's his attic. But right. Let's not hold that against him. So Terry White, hi, welcome to the Philip Maloney podcast.
Hi, Philip. How are you going?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for joining us. And I really appreciate some of the work that you've done. So for all the listeners and viewers out there, Terry has got a review that he's put into the Ministry of Justice in regards to an assessment of risk and harm to children and parents in private law cases. So I'd like him to tell us a little bit more about that as we go through. That's going to be the main construct of the podcast. But we'll take some time, get to know each other a little bit, and then fly into that. So once again, welcome. What are we to expect from a good judicial review?
Well, I'm really hoping that the judicial review will be accepted. I've applied to the Court of Appeal to have a look at the processes behind the Ministry of Justice report. And I use the term Ministry of Justice's report advisedly because they are saying that it is not actually their report, it's the report of the harms panel that they established. And what they've done by doing that, they are hoping that they will not be required to maintain any standards, in particular the Civil Service Code, but all the Nolan principles in relation to the production of the report.
Okay, sorry. So just briefly, because I don't know those terms. What are those terms, and why are they important for us to scrutinise?
Well, when we have the government produce a document
Mm-hmm.
or produce a piece of research, the people, if they are civil servants who produce it, are required to maintain objectivity, for instance,
Sure.
and various impartiality and a few other standards in their approach to the work and to the data, and are obliged with this overriding obligation to produce a particular quality of work.
Right.
When the Ministry of Justice chose to set up the panel, it decided to set it up as an independent body.
Yeah.
And that's not unusual, but I guess what's unusual in this particular circumstance is that the Ministry of Justice has an extraordinary control over the entirety of the information that's available because of these confidentiality restrictions. You can't talk on this podcast about your own case.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to any real extent, and neither can I.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the case for anyone in these cases. And so there is no data source available other than what the Ministry of Justice has or controls.
So the provisor for that, sorry to interrupt, Terry. So the provisor for that would be because it involves children.
Yes, right. Yes,
and that's why I couldn't. That's why I couldn't say. So I need to accept that. That's the reason why I can't do anything publicly. Like say help. Help. I'm being unfairly treated. Because if I do that, they'll say, look, you've compromised your children's future.
Yes, yeah,
which is
especially
interesting because
public
my children's future is compromised by virtue of this case. So it's a little bit okay.
So when it comes down to how you or I could gather information to challenge the minister, for instance, if he says, if the Lord Chancellor says that it's sunny outside, you and I cannot look out the window and check whether it's sunny outside. We have to rely entirely on him telling us whether or not it's sunny.
So I'm going to walk out in flip-flops and shorts.
I hope not.
And be complete. Well, on the judge's word that it's sunny outside, right?
Yeah, on the Lord Chancellor's word, yes.
That might be an analogy too far. So okay.
But when it comes to but that's actually okay. We can manage that if the Lord Chancellor behaves to a standard of conduct that respects that level of control. But when he set up this panel, he basically filled it with people of either compromised positions or compromised ideology, with no technical expertise. So it's almost all lawyers. We have one person that you could say is an expert. That's Isabel Trowler, but she wasn't on the main authoring part, and she and her qualification was social work. So we've got no scientists, we've got no child development psychologists, we've got no statisticians or mathematicians. We've got no one there who could properly negotiate the technical documents. We've got no one there who has, at least ostensibly, has any real knowledge of how to construct these kinds of studies. And then instead of interrogating all that data that he's holding, he's holding behind the shield of confidentiality, they were instructed to go out into the public and gather anecdotes. Right. So what they did was they undertook this public call for evidence, which sounds great, but it's actually a public call for anonymous responses. And what that does is it takes away any control over the system, right? Any control over that information. So it's quite possible that one person did 250 responses. It's quite possible that that person was based in New Zealand or South America or somewhere in the States. And it's quite possible that they absolutely lied about what they said. About so there's no verification of where these people are coming from.
Is that because you know that's the case, or is that because you can't get the answers to know that's the case?
It's impossible to get the answers to know. So when we look at control, whether the assessment or whether the survey was suitably controlled so that it could be reliable, you would be looking to control those factors so that you can say for certain that your data set is genuine. So a proper analysis would have interrogated a set of actual cases that they know about, would have drawn the names out, would have tracked down those people and would have asked them and would have been able to refer what they were saying back to the actual case file and what was actually found.
Right, so to the point of having an email address, an identity, so that you couldn't have one person filling out multiple
and
responses.
They said, exactly, and there's no way to know whether or not that was actually controlled. The other additional problem is that these are voluntary responses as well. When you have a complaint box, you get complaints more than compliments, right? It's usually the people who feel aggrieved that are going to complain. So it doesn't give you a very good picture of what's happening overall. So you don't have any control over whether it's true. You don't have any control over who's responding. It's most likely that the people will be responding are feeling aggrieved about their court decisions. The other main problem is that the responses themselves are inherently unreliable. These people have gone into a court of law and they've had their cases heard, and a judge has sat there and listened to both sides of the story. He's listened to whatever evidence is available, and he or she has taken the advice of a CAFCAS officer a professional, quite likely from a number of professionals, if the case is complex, and made a decision based on the available evidence in front of them. And what's obviously happened is that whatever story this person is telling has been found to be has been found in a court of law not to be entirely kosher, right? So if we were to define what is good information, you'd think that good information would be verifiable. It would be coming from a source that is impartial, and it would be and you get both sides of the story. But in this case, what we're getting is one side of the story of people that we know have an axe to grind. There's absolutely no control over whether or not they're putting in one or two responses, or whether they're getting together with their friends and all their friends are putting in responses and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it comes out in one way in the representation of the responses. There were 4 times as many female responses to male responses. And in private law cases, there's usually almost always a man and a woman. So really, there's no reason why it shouldn't be 50-50 in terms of the responses that you have when you're looking at these cases.
Unless, of course, there's a spike in same-sex lesbian relationships. Like, that would be the only way that I could ever think that there was more.
Yes.
And therein lies another sort of issue with sort of okay, I mean, I'm sort of digressing a little bit, but
it's a very small
if
percentage.
You've got a 4-to-1 ratio, how many people sampled?
It's 1,200, I think.
1,200 people.
No. Don't use the word sampled. It wasn't. It was not a sampling exercise.
Okay.
There were 1,200 respondees.
Right. So let's drill it. Let's drill just for my own sort of understanding, because I know some people might be familiar, but other people might not be familiar with what this is, what the actual practicalities of the process and what's not happened within the process. So from that sort of they've gone out with like a questionnaire to people. Okay, and these are people in through the family courts.
Well, what they did is they actually put it on a website and anyone could respond. So there's no way of checking whether any of these people have even been to family court. Right. We don't know anything about these people really. Presumably they would have done a background check on the 1 or 2 quotes that they actually put in the report. I'd hope so, just to make sure that they don't completely end up with egg on their faces. But well, you know, you can imagine what would happen if someone had said, "No, actually, I'm a 16-year-old in Delaware just screwing around, and you put it in your report." Ha ha ha! Yeah, that would have been very embarrassing.
So look, this is a little bit nuts, because you've got like if I wanted to do a report, say like I was a school governor, right, and I wanted to survey the parents, well, there's no point in me putting a survey out in Horse and Hound magazine to find out what's happening with the parents in this school, or like something that was accessible by people who were outside of the school. If I wanted to solve a problem within the school, I would want the parents, right, and maybe even the children.
Yeah, you would have kept it controlled.
You'd want to target it.
But what's even worse is that if your survey was about the children's performance, if you're a school governor and you want to find out what the children's performance are in school, you've got the data yourself, right? You should look first at the data that you've actually got and said, okay, well, what's happening in my school? You wouldn't go out and ask the parents, how do you think your child's doing?
Yeah.
Right? And like you might do that as well, but your first point of call would be to say, well, what about this data I've actually got? What do I know about my own school? You know.
So is it as strange as the Ministry of Justice has said, hey, look, family courts, we need to do we need to we need to file a report on this specific issue
Hmm.
that we're raising on your behalf?
Yeah. So what they would do, and it happens quite often actually, is that when there is research into the family court, you would be granted access to files, and you'd take a random set of files. You take, say, 100 files from this county and 100 files from this county, and 50 from there, which might have a lower population, and then that would give you a geographic view, and they'd be randomly sampled, and then you'd have a look at each of those individual files, and you say, okay, well, 30% of those don't have domestic abuse in them. Okay, from that we can deduce that 70% of cases have domestic abuse in them. They haven't even done that, right? They haven't even done that very, very simple assessment as to how many cases have domestic abuse, right, in a proper randomized sample. And so they just...
Okay, sorry. How do you know they haven't done it?
Well, that's a good question. I have actually asked them to produce it as part of my letter before claim for the judicial review, and they didn't. So, they could have just not given it to me.
Right.
And they might be holding it. But it would seem that Women's Aid are estimating that 70% of cases have domestic abuse in them, and other people are estimating as low as 40. So it's somewhere between those two, probably rested at 60%, I'd imagine.
And that's also a prudent sort of way of looking at that is, when was the domestic violence brought into the as an issue? Was it?
Yeah. Well, that's really
prior to court proceedings, or?
Yes. Yeah, because of course, if there was domestic abuse prior to this commencement of proceedings, there's obviously nothing that the courts can do about that. That's just something that has happened in society. And then you probably want to be looking at what happens after the courts have been involved, and it would seem, going from the numbers of homicides, it seems that it falls right off a cliff once you've got proceedings commenced in family court. The chances of ongoing harassment or domestic abuse or anything like that seems to pretty much disappear. Probably because the court's involved, but also because there's greater certainty. They can put in rules about people's behaviour and that, and it seems to get sorted out. So, these are the things. If you were assessing risk of harm, those are the things that you'd look at, and you wouldn't even need to begin to go outside to the public for a call for evidence, until you've got that baseline understanding of what the actual problem is.
Sure.
And then you can ask the right questions.
Yeah, because if you look at domestic violence, did a show the other day. It was great, with a panel of guests, and I think Deborah Powney, she highlighted the fact that you have a spectrum of domestic violence, from wolf whistling up to I think we were talking about the Sarah Everard case. So also when you say domestic violence, if you're looking at the specifics, did they give you any scale available of what
no
constitutes domestic violence?
No, not from this at all. So that's another one of the queries, of course, is that we're talking not about domestic violence anymore. We're talking about domestic abuse.
Okay.
If we're talking about domestic violence, is down by 70% since 2001, and it's halved in the past decade. It's come down from about 700,000 in 2001 to 200,000 incidents last year, and from about 400,000 a decade ago down to 200,000. So it's the violent side of it, the old concept of Mr. White singlet man coming home drunk,
frying pans.
Yeah, that's fast disappearing off the table. And what people are moving now towards is this broader concept of domestic abuse, and they've built in issues such as stalking and harassment and malicious communications. which kept pumping up the numbers. But even those numbers were dropping. So the numbers of domestic abuse fell from 8.9% to 6.1% last year. And so all the problem that the domestic abuse industry, such that it is that things are getting better, and they're getting better pretty fast. And so in order to keep themselves...
That's got to be a good thing, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But in order to keep themselves active, if you like, these organizations, as all organizations do, organizations tend to want to survive for their own sake. That's true of any corporate entity, but it's also true of any NGO. And in order to keep themselves alive, they've got to have that feedstock of abuse, basically. They've got to keep it going. The more effective they've been, the fewer cases of abuse there'll be. And so there's almost this constant pressure to find new avenues of abuse, new markets for abuse, if you like.
Right.
If you want to use a rather crude term, but nonetheless, that's from an organizational point of view, they've got full market penetration now. So if you imagine you're a startup company, and you got this big market, and you start producing your product, but eventually you get so saturated into the market, you've got so much of the market that you're just not going to grow anymore, right? Okay. Unless the population kind of increases, you got fully saturated. Well, the full saturation happened some time ago for these companies, and then what's been happening since then is that the number of oppressors has been coming down very sharply, because society's changed. We don't accept people beating up their wives anymore as a society. We don't accept people. This is across the board in a number of different areas. I mean, you've also got that issue with race relations. I think I can't remember the last time I heard about someone actually getting beaten up because they're black. It might happen. You may have heard it more than I have, but that.
What do you mean by that?
I just mean
steady.
You've got your ear to the ground more than I do.
Right. Okay. I'm Indian. I've got big ears. Have I? Yeah. Okay. All right.
When I was a kid, there was stuff like that going on around.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be happening anymore.
Let me go back to the domestic abuse, right? Yeah. I'm not sure it was ever acceptable for society, Western society, to accept a domestic violence incident.
It was, used to be. Long time.
I mean, I don't think anybody's going to clap hands about it. No. They would understand that there was sort of but she didn't have his dinner ready, or what have you. There were excuses made around that. But I don't think people would go have a look at what's going on over there, because that's you next, or I mean, okay, maybe they did. I think there's a sort of a grey area there as to what was acceptable. I mean, if you think
there's a lot of things going on a long time ago that we wouldn't accept now.
This is true. Yeah. This is true. And yeah, no, that's absolutely factual. There's I've got no problem with that. What I wanted to say was the sort of the care and the nurture of the man's role within a family and the family construct has changed very little in his wants and needs to progress and nurture a family. My voice is failing here. So I think that stayed sort of fairly steady throughout it. But then you get we need to wear seatbelts, right? Before, you didn't need to wear a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Before, it wasn't a criminal offence for some dickhead to beat his wife up, right? But now it is, because
force was always a problem.
Sorry?
Excessive force was always a problem.
Yeah, no, sure, absolutely. And there are legitimate incidences of where people have murdered their partners through this weird, sordid issues that that they have. It's not to make light of it, but it is to put it in a little bit more of a nuanced argument. So what you're saying is that settled down. So it's an industry-based issue now. So where it started, it was someone who wanted to do the right thing, call out the issue, fix the issue. Now that the issue seems to be getting fixed, it's no longer a domestic violence issue, it's now a domestic abuse issue. So is that a rebranding? Is that a fair way of putting it?
It's pushing out, it's broadening the market, if you like.
I see. Yeah.
So
adding another lane to the highway.
Yeah, it's much like Coca-Cola adding bottled water to its
right. Yeah.
Sort of saying, okay, well, the market is shrinking. We want to continue growing, so we'll explore these new areas. And I think you see across the board with a lot of these NGOs that they're sort of pushing into areas of human interaction where 10 years ago we probably wouldn't have imagined being involved in.
Yeah.
And the latest push is for controlling coercive behaviour, and there is obviously very good reasons why you'd want to be tight on controlling coercive behaviour, but it's getting really, really difficult to determine what is fact and what is fiction in those circumstances, because you're really pushing into someone's word against the other. You're really pushing into how did someone feel about what you say. I mean, if you asked me for a cup of tea and I made you a cup of coffee, is that me controlling and directing you in some insidious way, or did I make a mistake? And the same facts can be read so many different ways when you start moving into this territory of interpersonal relationships. Makes it very difficult from a legal perspective. And there's a recent decision in the House of Lords, in the Court of Appeal on this issue, and it was basically saying that we should move away. If there's an allegation of coercive controlling behaviour, we don't need to look at these subsidiary facts anymore. We're only going to look at, what whether or not there's coercive controlling behaviour. And how do you prove that? Well, the only way you can really prove that is if you believe what I tell you is my narrative, or you believe this other person's narrative. And so it's really coming down to he said, she said, and everything's going to be relying on uncertain and unverifiable mix of interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
As
a couple of points on that are domestic violence. You can understand, or like you could be fed that domestic violence happens more from men to women.
Yeah.
I don't personally. I'm not of that school. I think there are some I think women are just as capable of men to be able to to make mistakes and to hurt and harm people. But you can understand, like if somebody said he hit me, and you think, right, there's a guy and there's a little lady, and you kind of like go, okay, we're in civil court, so you don't have to have all the evidence, you don't have to have CCTV, you need the balance of probability. Now, if on the balance of probability, I looked at him, then I looked at her, I could kind of like go, okay, we believe your account, let's move to the next stage. Now, how do you balance the probability in a coercive controlling area that she isn't doing it to him? Because this is a psychological, it's not a physical thing anymore. It's not about how hard you can punch, or if you had a bruise that your cousin saw or something like that. You have to now, women are going to be in the same.
They've got an equality of arms, haven't they? They've got an equality of arms here. Whereas in the physical, in the physical side of things, it's very much the case that even if a woman punches you, I mean, I was about to say that in my adult life, I've been punched twice on 2 occasions. In anger, and both of them were from a woman, and both of them, I just shrugged off,
Sure.
And you shrug them off, and she hits you again, you just look, stop it.
Yeah.
You're beginning to irritate me now. But and of course,
which is infuriating for a woman, which is absolutely infuriating. I think that's sort of, that has to be understood as well, because when you're in the moment that you can punch your partner or somebody else, or you feel that you're going to punch somebody, part of your defense initially when that happens is that didn't hurt you, you know,
Mm.
or
Yeah.
or are you like, don't be such a pussy, you know, I'm a little woman and you're a bloke or what have you. But then obviously if it's reciprocated, then there's a bigger issue.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it can be, especially when you're dealing with troubled people. There is an estimate that 60% of the domestic violence is mutual couples violence. This is where both of them are going hammer and tongs against each other. But even in those situations, one would expect that the damage that can be inflicted by a man would, in the absence of firearms at least, be considerably greater than the damage that can be inflicted by a woman on a man.
Yeah.
And
God, unless you're cunning enough to do it whilst he's asleep, maybe.
Yeah, there's that.
Right.
And of course, weapons help a lot. A claw hammer in the head sort of is.
Yeah, and that's happened, right?
Yeah.
That's happened.
Yeah, she brought it in her handbag to a meeting and then smashed his head in with it, which is.
Is that right? Is that an actual?
That's the actual case. Yeah.
No, I mean, I can't imagine that. Is people when they get angry, they want some sort of revenge. We're all quite sort of sick towards that unless we reach a point where we can understand, or civilize ourselves and control ourselves to a bigger picture, which is normally children. So let's jump back into the report. What are your, like? Do you have a like a top 5 issues with the report? Have you given yourself a list of failings that you're looking for a review on?
Yeah. So basically, it undertook the panel process undertook 3 processes. They did a literature review. They undertook this panel survey and they did these focus groups. The focus groups, were taken out of the same sample set, so they're probably, in my view, they're equally unreliable. But of course, you've got the people in person, so at least they're from the right country. Hopefully, they did some vetting process to verify whether they've been to court or not before these focus groups. But you still have the problem of what they're trying to do is say the court's got it wrong in some way, and there's no way to say whether that's actually true, and the children are at risk. But that there's no way of proving that they're actually at risk in any way from the contact that they're having, unless you're dealing with actual police involved incidents or something. But so the focus groups, again, they didn't have any focus group that I can see of technical people, of psychologists and criminologists or statisticians or anything like that. So there wasn't any, there was no focus group that was tied onto a professional competency. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
They did have a judicial focus group, but it sounds like that got shut down mostly. I only saw really one recommendation from the judicial group, which was that the perpetrator programs were too standardized. There was a one-size-fits-all concept behind it, and the panel just said, well, our survey says that it's not, so it isn't. And so
so there's a lot of data on.
Listen to them.
Yeah.
Well, the big one was the appointment of the literature review author. So a literature review basically is they go out and they have a look at all the technical papers that are out in the field, and then they sort of like sum them and put them into a single report. A friend of mine called Brian Hudson, who has an excellent little YouTube on.
I know Brian. Yeah.
Yeah. He did a freedom of information request on the appointment of the literature review author, and there was no control over. There was no job specification. There was no skills requirement on it. He asked how many people were considered. There were none, and it seems that this person was just chosen because she happens to be a colleague of the authors. Right, so basically just a hand-picked person who has no technical qualifications. They chose this person, Dr. Adrian Barnett, to do it. She is a doctor of law with an English Lit major. So no technical qualifications whatsoever. And they've asked her to look over all the technical papers and give a view on them.
Right.
And she's got some absolutely remarkable views on science. You know, she seems to be a radical feminist, and some of her views are such that, you know, knowledge products should benefit women. Objectivity is masculine. You know,
Oh wow.
Objectivity is undesirable was another one. And you know,
Oh wow.
yeah, and she is totally caught up in this concept called critical theory, right? This idea that you should that you start off. Science will look at things. It'll say, what are my observations? Therefore, I've observed the world as it is, and I can have this theory, and then I can test it against other observations. And thus you have a progress of knowledge. It's an iterative process. You know, you're not always right, but you get it right over time because you keeping on testing it. But the critical theory comes from this point of view where you know what the world should be. So you develop knowledge products that help you change the world to what you know that it's going to be. Through, it should be, right? So
through Ministry of Justice reports.
The Ministry of Justice report is probably one of the most stark examples I've seen of critical theory in action, and it's coming through, you know, the Ministry of Justice, which is like deeply terrifying as a place for it to come from. The viewpoint of Dr. Adrian Barnett is that it's absolutely fine to produce documents which are misleading, provided it promotes the activist cause that you're trying to promote.
For the outcomes.
For the outcomes. So in this report, it deals with some of the most sensitive and controversial issues in family law. It's dealing with parental alienation, it's dealing with false allegations in family court, it's dealing with a whole mess of stuff. There's not a single paper that she refers to that had a view that was contrary to her position in the end. Now, if you're looking at a literature review and you're trying to look at all the papers, you're going to come across papers that have different views, and then you like compare and contrast them, and you say, well, they say this and these say this, and you know, that's what a proper literature review looks like. But this is just all one way, unidirectional.
So are they saying that there is no such, like, is parental alienation a thing as far as they're concerned? Is it not a thing?
Well, the literature review said that parental alienation is a mechanism to combat domestic abuse allegations, and so the heavy insinuation was that it is not existing as a genuine issue.
So that sort of simplifies parental alienation as it's just a tit for tat. So
yeah,
she said he's violent. He's saying that he can't see the kids.
Yeah, the heavy implication is that it's not an issue that needs to be considered in the family courts. But
wow,
that has since been roundly called down or called out, if you will, in the House of Lords. It was actually raised in the House of Lords. They had a debate over including parental alienation in the new domestic abuse bill as a form of domestic abuse, and the Ministry of Justice report was quoted as saying, "Oh no, parental alienation is just used to defend against, is used to minimise domestic abuse allegations." Yeah, and it clearly isn't. And
well, it's just such a. I mean, that's playground. That's a playground retort to the issue of the complexities of parental alienation.
I'm sorry, you froze there. Can you say it again?
Sorry, yeah, I was saying it's like a playground retort to the complexities of parental alienation. That is, well, I mean, you just have to look under the rug slightly to see instances where people weaponize the children.
Yeah.
You know, either way, I'm not even going to go into the gender bias around it, but you've got women not being able to see their children because you've got powerful, maybe financially viable men who are doing things, and vice versa. You know, the only way to get at him is to control the children, you know.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen, or it's only happening and it's being used as an excuse to sort of get back at the other.
Yeah. She's saying that it's used to undermine domestic abuse allegations. So,
Right.
and I imagine that in many ways that it does undermine domestic abuse allegations, because
Sure.
you do see this this dichotomy coming up relatively regularly, that the alienation is attached to false or vexatious allegations of domestic abuse, because that's one of the key ways you can get the children to side with you is to make the male, or to the opponent, basically the opponent parent, or I'll say male in most cases, but by no means restricted to that, to be the predator, right? Because the system is that the child will attach to a parent because, you know, running around in the savannah, you know, and with you know, a rabbit's pelt around your waist, you know, with a lot of predators around, your safest place as a young child is with your parent, and that's so, you know, there's this attachment bond that you, as a young child, automatically want to be in the proximity of your parent, even if that parent is abusive, because an abusive parent is still less risky than a predator, right? But what parental alienation does is it reframes the other parent as the predator, and so the child will be attracted to you as a safe point against the predator and the other parent predator.
Right.
So they'll, you know, basically, so the domestic abuse is attached a lot to that, because that is actually the primary mechanism to do it. A lot of men who alienate the mother seem to take a different tack in saying that it's usually some sort of mental health or corrosive ineptitude issue in some respects. So it's slightly different for males accusing the females and females accusing the males of parental alienation.
So I would see, I would see that if you have an issue with the adult, either way, then you've got a child. All of a sudden, the relationship that the adults have supersedes the relationship that the child will have with the targeted parent. So if the mother has the child, is making an allegation of a issue with the husband towards her, not necessarily the child, but to say he's violent, he's controlling, etc. That's why I'm taking the kids. So do you see more of that, or do you see then a like an encompassment of the child within the issues that the perpetrator is being accused of?
In what? In parental alienation?
Well, in parental alienation, or are there any sort of facts and figures around that consideration?
Not available in the UK. Right, because the work hasn't been done. I mean, you'd imagine that a report assessing risk of harm to children would do some of that work, would actually assess the risk of harm to children and to parents. And
so this is grassroots work, though. This is social services going in, doing Section 7s, etc. Maybe having sort of like a file of allegations, timeframes, when did it happen, etc., etc. But I sort of sympathize a lot with the social services and the Kafka's grassroots players when the people who are making decisions are not even, you know, I mean, you couldn't dance to that rhythm for the Ministry of Justice if they're sort of going out and getting these really inept, weird not judgments, but assessments on
On
situations.
yeah, and of course the report is.
Like, where would you start as a social worker?
Okay, so I have a problem with some social workers and not with others. They're all individuals and they all have their own quirks one way or the other. Some of them are extremely competent and some of them are extremely not. And like any profession that has an inordinate amount of power, it will attract people, a small percentage at least. But
Sure.
if you're someone who is attracted to the use of power, being a social worker for Kafkas is quite is quite a position that you might enjoy, and you might use to abuse. It's the same way that the Boy Scouts were attractive to pedophiles. The opportunity, the people who are inclined to behave in that way will be attracted to the industry that gives them rope to do that. But having said that, the Kafkas, by and large, are people who are quite competent, by and large, and who are, by and large, wanting to do the right thing by the children. In fact, I think all of them really want to do the right thing by the children. I think some of them are quite misguided in this ideology that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's sort of what I'm trying to steer towards, because if you've got a social worker who, to all intents and purposes, wants to do a really good job.
Yeah.
If you give her a loose brief, and you give her the ability to kind of balance probabilities, because that's all it needs to be, is a balanced probability, and you're not looking at sort of facts, or you've got a really low threshold of issues that you can add to the thing. It's really easy to kind of like go, do you know what, this geezer's rubbing me up the wrong way. You're being really nice to me. Tell me again what happened. Okay, we've had an allegation of this. He's denied it. Over to you, judge. And then there's no real sort of nuance or anything like that being considered within the issue, within the debate, because already the threshold is so low on coercive control, a stern look,
it's going to be really tough.
Don't spend all that money because we're planning on going on holiday. That's a financial control, and if you said he doesn't let me spend money, that's true, right? On the balance of property, he didn't let you spend the money.
I'm saying
fact.
I'm seeing that a lot, actually, because if there's a disagreement over finances, that can be that is quite often a source of conflict within the marriage anyway. And criminalizing it is just going to be such a headache. Can you, and it being a reason for you never to see your kids again.
Therein lies the crux of it. You can't see your kids because you didn't let us spend the money. That's weird. That's weird. Whoever says there's a justification for not seeing your kids because of coercive control, whatever it is, that's not the kid. The kid isn't, by all accounts, they've got a better relationship than with the other parent, with the child, and then they know it. So that's the, if the punch doesn't hurt him when you punch him back, here's what will hurt you. This will get you in the ghoulies. I'll take the kids away. So we're perpetuating this like weird scenario. You've got a really good video that you've done in like a slide deck voiceover video.
One of the, I was just thinking about that video as well as something of a playbook, but one of the things I really should highlight, I guess, is that in this report, buried in a footnote, it says that the word perpetrator means not only people who have been, it means people who have been found to have perpetrated, but also people who have been alleged to have been perpetrators, right?
Right.
So the definition includes people who have had an allegation of domestic abuse put against them, even if they've been cleared of it. So
The police are going to have a massive issue with that.
Why?
Well, because in policing, you're not a victim or a perpetrator. You're somebody who has made an allegation and somebody who's facing an allegation. This isn't, to say victim and perpetrator would suggest that you're a victim because something's happened to you, and you're a perpetrator because you did something. So it's so I mean, police will just all of a sudden, it's like, okay, so I'm going to say that guy over there, he hit me.
Yeah.
He hit me. Okay. So I'm not a woman, but under the same rules, he's now a perpetrator. So he's done it. Now he has to go through the system and he has to be punished.
Well, for the purpose of this report, that would be the case, because they're saying that if you've been alleged to have been a perpetrator, then you are automatically a perpetrator, right?
That's a footnote in this.
And that's just a little footnote. You'd have to really you'd see the little subscripted number 157 and then look down and read it. But it's there, all right. And then you realise that when they're saying things like that, in most children's proceedings in private law, the child ends up having contact with the perpetrator. Yeah. What that actually means is, in most of these cases, the courts looked at this and said, "No, there's nothing here," or what are you talking about? That's nothing, But that's what's actually happened. But the way they put in the report, it sounds like really spooky that the children are at risk because they're having contact with domestic abuse perpetrators.
So what they're saying there between the lines is, okay, judge, I dare you, because if anything happens now, you've let them go back. And the way safeguarding is now, dear Lord, there's not a judge in the world that's going to say, oh, do you know what? I'm going to vouch for this guy not to do anything.
Well, the thing that irritates me about this report is not once does it talk about the benefits of contact.
Right.
And we saw this race relations report recently come out, didn't we?
Oh, and
that identifies straight away fatherlessness is a real problem for the outcomes for these children, right? In terms of their long-term progress, and that having a good relationship with both parents is really important. Yeah. And but there's no appreciation of how much damage is being done in court by separating a child from a parent on the basis of an allegation that's unproved, right? Yeah. And that really, if you were interested in assessing risk of harm to children, that is something that you would look at. I think Jess Phillips said in court, you count what you can. You said in Parliament when she was complaining about us not counting female victims of homicide, that you count what you value, right? And that's true. They're not counting the damage to the children that's being done from this, because the report authors do not actually value the children. They're not concerned. Children are barely mentioned in this report. I think there's 2 mentions of them in 400 pages worth of reports, right, of what their children actually experience and what they're coming out with. And if you were genuinely interested in assessing risk of harm in private law children's proceedings, one of the first things you'd look at is, what are the outcomes for the children of these decisions? Have these decisions that says, yes, Dad, let's just say there is a decision that says, yes, Dad committed domestic abuse, but it's probably not going to happen again. Let's see how he goes. How has that turned out? Has that actually ended up with any domestic abuse? Is the child in danger? Are the outcomes for those children better than the outcomes for the children who never see their father again? What is the overall holistic risk to the child from allowing contact and also from disallowing contact? Because they both have risks and benefits.
Yeah. So this is this the data that you've asked for and has not been tallied?
We've asked them to present to us a multivariate longitudinal analysis of children's outcomes, if they have it. And we got no response basically from that request, which indicates to me, and certainly would indicate that work hasn't been actually done yet.
I'm assuming that you've gone through the proper timescales, like you didn't just email them yesterday and haven't had that. Like, so what's the timescale?
No. That first request went in July or August. So the report came out 25th of June, and then you have 90 days essentially to put in a judicial review. But one of the things that you need to do before submitting a judicial review is a letter before claim. And the letter before claim asks what additional information you'd like to have. And so we'd asked them to present to us all those studies that they would have done, or that they should have done, into what the actual risks of harm actually are. And
so how would that compare to another review that's just happened with the race relations, etc.?
Yeah.
What's the what have they done? Because you've looked at this as well, haven't you?
Well, I've read through it and I compared it to what the Ministry of Justice has done, and you can see that this race review, it had a panel with scientists and economists. It had people from a multi streams of professionalism looking at this.
Were they all white? Were they all white people?
No, they were mostly coloured. I think there was one white person on it.
Okay.
And that it probably, I think in the circumstances it had to be that way, but there's no reason why, if you were being completely colorblind, there's no reason why a white.
Okay, but white people essentially were represented in the singular.
Yeah, 1 out of 10 or something.
But you could argue that the system also was there for the white man. I don't know. You could argue that even though there was one person who presented as white, people with a problem with the system would suggest that regardless of how many white people you had representing the issue of race in the United Kingdom, that behind that panel, the system itself was a white run, system. But I'm digressing massively. It's not.
I don't see how you could possibly have it any other way in a white majority country. Of course, there's going to be white, unless you actually expunge the whites from the institutions. I don't think you can do it any other way. But in any event, the panel itself that these people set up, had a lot of different skill bases. It had scientists, it had economists, it had people from different walks of life. Right.
Yes.
What you had on the harms panel was mostly lawyers and a social worker, and people with no identifiable expertise at all, which was stunning.
So lawyers being a massive vested interest.
Yes and no. The people that they had on, there was perhaps one lobby group. The other people were professors of law and doctors of law and a senior judge and a junior judge, and none of them, I would say, had a commercial, and none of those people, I'd say, would have a commercial vested interest. I'd say that those people were more driven, at least on the authorship side, more driven from their feminist viewpoints. What I was concerned about in the panel makeup, in that respect, and them all being lawyers, was more the absence of the appropriate skills to look at this from different viewpoints, right?
Analyzing the data, knowing the right questions.
Yeah, especially when you're looking at such complex issues as child development psychology and criminology and the risk of recidivism and what happens to how people's behaviours change, etc. And the drivers of abuse and violence, because a lot of the domestic abuse rhetoric surrounds this idea that men use domestic abuse to control women as some sort of misogynist kind of thing, right? Yeah. Whereas in actual fact, the vast majority of violence occurs against men generally, and there's obviously there's not men hating other men and therefore attacking them in the street. You know, there's just male aggression. It comes out in all areas.
Yeah.
But in any event, you have the lawyers. You don't actually have the professional expertise across the different ranges. And so what this group did in the race report, they actually said, okay, well, let's look at the data, right? And they went in and they got hold of the real data, and they said, okay, let's do a multivariate analysis. How much of this is driven by race? How can we determine it's driven by race? Not other factors like upbringing, like fatherlessness, like the harms report, which came from a fixed view of what the problem was, and then just tried to collect data to support that fixed view to act as a platform for activism to try and get real change. And you even saw it. I even saw it. There was a senior judge there called Mr. Justice Cobb. And before this review had even started, he had actually written that now's the time to try and change things. You know, this is the opportunity for us to try and change things. You know, letter to before this review even started. And you know, just having these people with these prefixed ideas of where they want to go and what they want to take things, it's so dangerous. It's so dangerous.
So aside from that type of interpretation to the race relationship, how did it compare with the harms, the domestic abuse with the cases? Like, if you were to describe the two types of report, how would you sum them up?
Well, one's serious and one isn't.
Right.
The race report's a serious piece of competent professional work, and the harms report.
Is that because it would be scrutinised by the media? It would be scrutinised by society in general?
I think if the risk of harms
had to be good.
If the risk of harms report had come out with a similar conclusion, or rather similar findings, it would have been under the same level of scrutiny as the race report. You know, if it had come through with findings that were against the for want of a better term, the woke culture, but for the cultural zeitgeist of oppressive.
So coercive control shouldn't be part of it. The bar needs to be higher.
Yeah, well, imagine if they'd come through with saying that there's a lot of false allegations in family court, and that's causing us some real problems. Right, which is the big elephant in the room that no one's talking about. The reason why, you look at this domestic violence, it's plummeting down, and yet there's more cases than ever in family court with domestic violence allegations. Right.
Yeah.
So it's clearly there's a disconnect between what's happening in society and what's happening in family court. And they actually said that research demonstrates that false allegations are very low. And they have one piece of research for this, which was the study in Oregon. And that study in Oregon, they have 23% of their custody cases have allegations of domestic abuse. Right. So
that's quite low
compared to 70%.
Yeah.
Women's Aid is saying in the UK, okay, Oregon have got low levels of false allegations. What's happening here?
But then even here, you couldn't say if 70% of cases go into the UK courts that there's a high number of them being false allegations by virtue of the actual system and how it processes the amount of numbers of false allegations. They get into the system and the judge says, no, that's not a false allegation, because on the balance of probability, probably happened.
Yeah, and also how you define a false allegation, because of course they never say this allegation is false. They say it's unproven. Yeah. So it sort of sits in this netherworld of being.
You'd never get the measurement. Never get the measurement to that question.
But you could possibly say that the allegation, is completely unsubstantiated, i.e., there's no corroborating evidence for it.
I suppose you might have it from people who face a lot of accusations and they have no further action, etc., etc. But that's out of the court. That's more sort of to the to the police.
Even then, they don't say false allegations, do they? They say no further action.
No further action. That's right.
It's quite a separate and unique thing to turn around and say the allegation is false.
Yeah.
Because that is actually pushing the onus of proof, far beyond into the other court, and no one can be bothered looking at that, because once it's unproved, who cares whether it's false or whatever? It doesn't have an impact.
Yeah, it's something that maybe a higher court would determine, but people don't want to deal with the false allegation, because if you deal with the false allegation, there's another issue. It's why did you make that false allegation?
Well, that's the complication that we're going to have with coercive control, of course, when it comes in, because there is actually Home Office guidance, and this recent case, this H&N and others case that's come through, says that the Home Office guidance should apply in the family court for paradigm behaviours, right? What they call paradigm behaviours, so typical behaviours of what coercive control is, and one of them is vexatious allegations. So the making of vexatious allegations to draw authorities into colluding with your coercive control. Right?
Yeah.
So that's exactly these domestic abuse allegations that are designed to get the agencies like CAFCAS and the courts and the police and everything to undertake your abuse of your partner for you, right? To try and get the police to come and take him away and put him in prison or at least in jail overnight, as a punishment to him for some slight that you've had. And I've got, I work as a Mackenzie friend, and I've got one case where this woman has just gone bananas over the past year and a half, reporting him for everything, just trying to get him arrested.
Something.
A car drove past her house that looked like his car, and she calls the police for harassment against him, And he gets a visit from the police, and he's going to say, well, where were you? Oh, I was here. No, there's no non-molestation order or anything like that. She's just throwing these allegations constantly.
Something's going to stick.
Yeah, that's the theory. And of course, if you've been through these experiences, you realise that that's the way the family court operates.
Yeah.
Says, that allegation was false, but maybe this one's true. Keep fishing, keep going, keep the allegations coming in. Maybe one of them will stick.
Yeah. And
hopefully one of the outcomes of looking at coercive controlling behaviour will be that the courts will eventually say, okay, these allegations are actually the coercive controlling behaviour, and we need to be aware of this as a risk of domestic abuse in and of itself. So the accuser is the abuser, if you want.
Right.
That's my neat little way of putting it.
The accuser is the abuser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like he who smelt it dealt it, but
the accuser is the abuser. It's so sad that they didn't have any psychologists, etc., within the panel to offer that type of insight, because they use them in the higher courts. Somebody to say, look, beware of how you triangulate yourself with the person who makes the allegations. Because you see it just in the playground, right? You see it in society. You'll see even mothers going to pick up their kids and dads going to pick up their kids, little pockets of people who sort of stand together, and they've all got a little story as to why they all stand together. We stand here because that one over there, so we're safe together, and that one over there is standing over there with another group of people going, we're standing over here because those lot over there. Do you know what I mean? And they all just sort of like.
What do you guys?
And then you get people just go sort of between the two, going, "I'm not even interested in your shit. I'm just here to pick up a kid." But that sort of that hero. Everybody wants to be a hero for somebody with a with a gripe, as it were.
The white knight syndrome.
Dress up your social services and say, "Look, do you know what? Here's a cape. Here's a little mask." You don't even have to have any of your details or what have you. You're going to be completely anonymous. Go and make a decision as to what's happening here, And women will come across more You know, women like other women superficially, you know, or they like men to think they like other women. But, I've worked
Yeah.
with women, and oh my God, yeah, that can be very challenging. It can be very challenging. But
Yeah.
yeah. So okay. So how much of this is an industry?
There are two factors that seem to be working in parallel. One is there is a psychological tendency that if you are looking for something and it's not present, then you'll start misinterpreting things to fit in what you're looking for. The experiment that I read on it was, if you have like if your job is to search out blue dots, and what they did was that they slowly removed the number of blue dots, and people started seeing purple dots as blue dots.
Okay.
As the number of blue dots became rarer and rarer, they actually switched and started associating other things. So there's that. So on an individual level, there's that.
So you get that sort of orangey kind of blue. That kind of greenish blue.
Eventually,
you
yeah.
get that, you know the red blue.
Yeah,
yeah.
So people would be more inclined to as an individual level to expand the range of things that they're looking for if they identify that there's a decrease. But the other thing is the industry itself, and why that kind of behavior is tolerated at an organizational level. And that is more, in my view, driven by the organization wanting to sustain itself, wanting to survive. So it's a situation where you have a full market saturation. So if you're a startup company and you come into an industry and you climb quickly through the market and you get into the stage where you've fully saturated what the market is, you know, however big the market is, and then you sit there as a cash cow after that, you know, your sales gently rising in line with the rise in population. But what we've actually seen here is a declining market, because things are actually getting better, much better, quite quickly. Domestic violence has reduced 70% since 2001. It's halved in the past decade. And things are, and the broader categorization of domestic abuse has come down from 8.9 to 6.1%. So it's falling quite rapidly.
Yeah. And
that means that from an organizational point of view, your market, if you like, because the drivers of consumption of their good is their market, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's falling away. That's decreasing rapidly. So it's turning from a cash cow to a dog, if you like. And so the organization is motivated to continue expanding its market in some and branching out. And so we had that move from domestic violence to domestic abuse, and now we're sort of like moving into this, moving in from a concentration on findings of actual abuse to allegations. So they're moving. So the big barrier they felt was that they weren't getting enough people proved guilty of domestic abuse. So what they're trying to do is, you know, kick the requirement for proof aside and actually just go straight for allegation. And, you know, if there's,
I think you had a great analogy around sort of St. George slaying the dragon.
That was Douglas Murray's one. Yeah. So,
right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah. So you know, St. George kills the dragon, and you know, gets a lot of applause and appreciation for it, and then you know, goes and kills a lesser dragon, and you know, that's the end of that dragon, and then keeps on killing smaller and smaller animals until he's
dragons kind of get the message, and they're like, all right, okay,
we'll hang back, but
we're not going to kill people or pillage villages.
Yeah. So and King George just keeps St. George just keeps on lancing smaller and smaller animals, hoping for past glories, and you know, ends up chasing dormice around. And you know, there's
which is an image because like it's so apt, because you've got what is our civil servants, right? The Home Office, who and the Ministry of Justice, they work for us, for the benefit of us, for our society to function and to do it well. But they're running it like a corporate entity who are looking for their next quarter. You know, this is the next quarter. You got to hit a target, right? So we need more people with problems. We need more people with issues. How are we going to find more issues, more problems? So that, you know, that's a financial gain there massively.
That's a grievance strain. In the civil service, there's you can watch old reruns of Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister for this, but the theory being that in the civil service your status is attached to your budget.
Yeah.
So if you're in charge of a department with a very large budget, then you're a big honcho walking around in the civil service halls, and and so the idea being that the various departments are in competition to increase their budget however they can. And of course, if you've got a diminishing need for your services, then you're going to be having a diminished status. So there is that pull from within the bureaucracy, but I'm more concerned about the push that's coming from the NGO sector, and looking at the non-government organisations. So this would be organisations, domestic abuse arenas such as Refuge and Women's Aid, and particularly
Respect. Are they?
Respect's another big one. So that's Respect in charge of these domestic abuse perpetrator programs. Of course, you know, you need domestic abuse perpetrators to have a domestic abuse perpetrator program.
Yeah.
So all three of these organisations, I think Deborah Powney referred to them as the big three.
The cartel.
It appears that they are effectively in a situation that is akin to a cartel. Of course, you know, there's no actual market, there's no pricing to be governed or anything like that, but they do have a monopolistic kind of control over the various areas. And these NGOs, of course, particularly Women's Aid and Refuge, and to a lesser extent Respect, have tied themselves to the mast of women being the victims of domestic abuse in all areas, and that domestic abuse is driven primarily by this idea of men wanting to control women in a misogynist kind of way, which doesn't give them a lot of latitude to adapt to the environments that changes. So as we move into coercive control and those tools of coercive control which are more available to women for whatever reason than men, and we start seeing a balancing of those issues, they're not really well prepared to adjust to that market. And what they actually need is, you know, in order to continue their growth as an NGO, so the NGOs are in competition with each other effectively. They're in competition with each other for attention, donations, and government grants. And yeah, it matters in maintaining that position and growing that position that they retain relevance, right? Yeah. And if the domestic abuse issue is sort of like winding itself down, they have an issue with maintaining relevance. And from an organizational point of view, that's a push force, and there doesn't seem to be much resistance on the bureaucratic side to that because of the pull force. So it's
infiltrated.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's in. Yeah, I don't want to use those words quite so loosely without knowing the exact situation, but there isn't the structural pushback that you'd want to see in order to keep these organizations enclosed. It has some similarities, I'd say, with the military industrial complex, in that it has that push that, you know, the military wants to expand and the suppliers want to pushing for the military to expand to sell more. So there isn't that natural control
So
coming.
the war makes money.
Sorry?
So the war makes money. The war generates revenue. You know, if we've got to go into, like, if you look at the military industrial, there's sort of whispers at the moment. We've got a lot of missiles that haven't been used in over 10 years. We've got a lot of tanks that haven't been used in over 10 years. And they're getting very dusty.
Yeah.
It's a terrible waste of money.
It's beginning to look like that, isn't it? But there is sort of like it doesn't have that natural organizational control. If you were an investor, say in a company that was a cash cow, and you saw the market disappearing, you would divest your investment. You'd pull the money out, right? And the organization will die. But there's not. The NGOs don't have that control, right? They don't have that natural controlling force coming from the people with vested money in what they're doing, right? They don't have that discipline that comes from people who want to see an actual return from what they're doing. So they're just continuing forward, and becoming, in my mind, more manic. You know, they're sort of searching for this market that is increasingly elusive. Within the bounds of normal human interactions.
They're stepping on. They're not helping women. It's really unfair the way things are. You know, they wouldn't see themselves as what the sort of the media would portray. They don't see themselves as victims. You know, they see themselves as like people who want nice, wholesome, loving families, and most of them have that. You know, certainly most of them aspire to having that.
Yeah, it's the feminist side really has become. Yeah, remember 1984? I don't know if you're. Yeah, the year 1984.
George Orwell, or the actual year.
The year 1984. Sisters are doing it for themselves. Remember that song?
Yeah.
By Aretha Franklin and the Eurythmics.
Yeah.
You know, think about those sisters are doing it for themselves, standing on their own 2 feet. You know, it was really empowerment. It was a triumphant song.
It was amazing. Everybody got behind it.
Yeah. And the feminism you have now is more, but I'm just a little bit girl in pigtails. Can't you carry me, kind of thing. You know, it's really enfeebled and scared and
it's so selective. It's ego. If you want a review on the MOJ. It might happen. It might not happen. It doesn't mean that we don't get up and move on and do something else again, you know, or we say, wow, that's fantastic, that there's some movement in the right direction. Because, you know, I don't know, it does kind of, it really perplexes me the way people take ownership over things. I don't own this issue. I don't own the...
Yes, you do, Phil. You do. You own don't sell yourself short.
Well, okay, look, I mean, this is my creative outlet, right? I mean, I'll tell that to anybody. But this isn't for my ego. I could sit here and I could chat to some of my mates and stuff into this area, but it's a passion of mine. But what I fundamentally know is that I don't have the answers. I don't have all of the solutions to all of these problems. They're vary, they're multifaceted. You know, parental alienation is disputed, you know, so let's keep talking about it. Let's keep discussing it. Some people say the name should change. It shouldn't be parental alienation. Some people say it's a narrow field. Some people say it's a wide field. Just keep talking about it. What you're doing is fantastic.
Thanks, Phil. I think we've spent 2 hours almost on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't even really had any crack or bants. And so I wanted to get into you being Australian and all the rest of it, but I felt that I've already forgiven that, you know, through your sort of.
I tell you one thing I did want to say before we hit off was.
Is this where you flip me the bird and hang up?
The having a look at that graph, and you see domestic violence diminished so much. And we also saw this in the race report, where you see, you know, they're saying institutional racism isn't really there. And, you know, where's the champagne? Why aren't people celebrating this? You know, this is a triumph of our society to be putting this stuff behind us.
Yeah.
All we're getting out of these activist groups is more and more crazy talk, and further distance from the original objective.
Yeah.
Surely the objective was to achieve a reduction in domestic abuse. Surely the objective was to eliminate institutional racism. These, these groups should be celebrating in the streets. They should be like horns and champagne and balloons. This is this is something that we should be proud of as a society, how we've moved. And instead, it's just gotten, it just gets snipier and more vicious, and it's so frustrating. It's such an impossible position to be in, because you're really inviting the state to be involved in a family, and it's incredibly hard for the state to do that. Yeah, the state can get, the state wasn't really there. It was never really supposed to be doing these functions. The nation state has a monopoly on violence, and it basically ensures that contracts between people work, and and general crime goes down so that people can have stable lives. But getting involved in families in this way is not something that the nation state was constructed to do. That's more of a religious role. And what's happened is that religion has gone mainly from that role, and we're back into, and in a religious situation, you'd have your parish priest, and they'd try and counsel you and tell you how evil you are for cheating, and give you penance or whatever. But that was a spiritual religious role, and what we've done is we've asked the state to come in instead and become in that sense, we've lost the separation of church and state, in that sense, because the state is actually becoming that role.
Omnipotent.
Yeah. And I'm not too sure if it's necessarily a good direction. It's a necessary direction, though, because
I think that I'd be happier with it if it wasn't such a important matter. If it was parking tickets and speeding fines and council tax payments, go ahead, deal with it in that regards, on the balance of probability. When it comes down to whether you should have a relationship with your children, I think the threshold is way too low. I think the family courts have tripped themselves up in many respects by saying, we can handle this, we can do this. We've got all of these multi-tiered, multifaceted organizations at our disposal to be able to make these decisions. And then, if you just look at the chat groups that we're involved with, countless, tens of thousands of people, all saying that this is wrong, all pounding out of their chests that this is a problem.
Yeah, and their partners are saying exactly the same thing, because no one's getting what they want.
Yeah.
That's the problem with family court. It's really stuck itself in the middle of two arguing people. And yes, it's very rare that there's one good side and one bad side. Usually both parents are doing something wrong a little bit, maybe worse than the other.
They're angry.
Yeah,
a couple of angry people having a fight.
Yeah.
So in the haste of a fight, we say awful things.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily mean them, but there are people perpetuating those little snapshots of your life and making them into, presenting those as your wishes for the way that this goes forwards. And that hurts the children.
Yeah, especially at the end of a relationship. Right, what a stressful time, right? You have, by the time that you're separating, you've put up with so much shit by then, right? You've really put up with more than you can handle anymore, right? That's why you're separating. You've gone beyond what you're willing to countenance anymore. And so, of course, you just don't have, unless you're a very spiritual together person, and so is the other person, you don't have the tools or the resources or even the energy to to be as accommodating and as reasonable and as rational as you should be. You know, at the end, you know.
You're absolutely right. You draw on something quite poignant, because imagine being at the beginning of your relationship, and someone telling you this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You're in love, right? You know, that other person hasn't left your mind for weeks.
Yeah.
Days. You know, hasn't left your mind, right? And they're going to tell you that so 9 years down the road, you're going to have 2 children. You're not going to see the children. There's going to be a financial penalty. There's going to be allegations. There's going to be this. There's going to be that. You go, fuck off. No way. Not us.
Yeah.
Not us, man. We are groovy. You know, we're going to take on the world. We've got it all at our feet. We're going to, we're going to go and do all of these things. So you've got them at this heightened state of like, and it's baseless. It's baseless. It's not based on, you didn't bump into each other, shoulder barge and go, oh, you're a prick. Right. Yeah. Screw you. Do you know what I mean? And then it's like, all of a sudden it sort of, all of a sudden you're tearing lumps out of each other at court. Right. Yeah. It's not the way it happened.
No. You started off in a position, you really got to know each other, and you really got to know exactly how to piss the other one off, right? You learned, you took 5 years worth of note taking,
notes.
Really know what to do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And
good.
And the state's got it, it's just dumped itself right in the middle of it, you know, and that's why I say, the family court, it's got a lot of flaws, but their job is tough, man. That's a tough job to get yourself in between those 2 warring couples and try and make some sense out of it.
Well, there's got to be a 50-50. There's got to be somewhere where we can come together at some point, but I don't think it's going to be as things stand at the moment, because we need a seat at the table, right? Men, parental alienation, the CMS, family courts, representatives opposing those need to be heard and legitimized. And there needs to be a more of a structured balance of power for outcomes for the children. And I think you'll find that with everything, there's more similarities than there are, differences. The children being one of them. Terrence, thank you so much for coming on and explaining your work. I really appreciate your time.
And if you need anything else, just give us a bell.
I'll keep in touch with you.
All right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Terrence. All the best, pal.
In a car on the way to your job, all alone with your kids, with your wife, or with your dog. You can listen anywhere. You can listen everywhere to the feeling.